Hello and welcome. Today's story comes once again from our paranormal. The story is titled, My Grandfather's Ex-Girlfriend Wasn't Human. Hello, this is my first time posting in this sub, and I wanted to share a story that chilled me to the bone, with permission from my grandpa, of course. I'm a bit skeptical about this story, but the more I thought about it, the more horrifying it is. So, for a bit of background, I'm half Filipino and half American. Every summer, my parents and I would visit the Philippines and usually stay at my grandparents' place. A week ago, my grandpa on my mom's side told me this true story from his youth. The way he said it, I noticed that he was still shaken and scared from whatever happened. So here's the story. Back in 1970, when my grandpa was 18, he was dating this girl who was a year younger than him for over a year. Let's call this girl S. S was beautiful, sweet, kind, and easy on the eyes, according to him. When summer started, S invited him to her parents' home in the province. S was currently staying with her aunt while she went to school in my grandpa's town. My grandpa was skeptical at first because the area that S lived in was quite rural and would take 5 hours to arrive by bus. But Grandpa was infatuated with S, so he said, why the hell not? So with permission from his parents, he packed up and he and S were on their way. When they arrived at her hometown, he noticed that a lot of people were staring at them. It was a small town, so the population wasn't that big. S showed him around where the shops were, the diners, etc. But Grandpa would notice people staring at them. And one time he heard a couple whisper, Aswang. If you're wondering what the hell an Aswang is, in Filipino folklore, an Aswang is a malevolent, shape-shifting, flesh-eating monster. From what I learned, by the day, they look and act like normal people. However, at night, they reveal their true selves. Back to the story. So S and Grandpa arrive at S's house. It was a large, 3-story wooden home. Grandpa then met S's parents. They greeted him warmly and invited him in, and exchanged talks over dinner. Grandpa said that they seemed like a couple of nice, normal people. On the first night, he was sleeping in S's room on the second floor. Grandpa woke up hearing a strange noise. The first thing he noticed was that S was gone. He assumed that she must have went to the bathroom, so he lied down again. But the weird sound continued. It was coming from the floor above. He said that it sounded like a cat scratching its claws on the wooden floor, accompanied by what sounded like a person mumbling. He tried to ignore it, but it started getting louder until he could hear multiple clawing noises from above, like multiple cats scratching on the wooden floor as well as mumbling. S still hasn't come back at this point, which made him worry. That's when he heard loud thumping from upstairs, like a person jumping. Grandpa is really weirded out at this point, so covers his ears with his pillow. The next day, he told S that their cats were really loud and that he couldn't sleep. S just looked at him confused and said, "We don't have cats." "Huh? That's weird. I could have sworn I heard cats last night," he said. On the second night, he was woken up again by the same sounds. He says at that point he was thinking, "What the fuck?" Then he hears loud grunting from above, like an animal in pain. He tries going back to sleep, but then he's startled by what sounded like a roar. This continues for another day, until on the fourth night, Grandpa decided he has had enough. He was going to man up, march upstairs, and see what the hell was going on. So it was around 1 in the morning, according to him. He said it was strange because he didn't hear any more of the weird sounds, but he decided to go upstairs anyway. He tiptoed across the floor and reached the stairs leading to the 3rd floor. Once he reached the 3rd floor, he notices something weird. The lights wouldn't work, even though they were working fine before he went to bed, and the only source of light was the moonlight, which illuminated the interior. He makes his way to the room that was above him on the 2nd floor, where the sounds were coming from, and what he saw made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The floor was littered with claw marks, the windows were wide open, and there were blood stains across the floor. There were no signs of S or her parents anywhere. Freaked out, he went down back to the 2nd floor, but then his nose caught a whiff of something he hadn't noticed before. It was coming from the kitchen. Curious, he went to take a look, but it was so dark that he could barely make anything out. As he walked, his hand touched something that felt like a large metal pot. He opened the lid. A great number of flies escaped, and his nose was assaulted by an extremely awful, putrid smell that he said nearly made him vomit. It was so dark that he couldn't see what was inside the pot, so he immediately slammed the lid down and ran back to the room and forced himself to sleep. The next day, during lunch, S's mother served dinguan, animal blood that has been cooked and mixed with herbs and spices. But my grandpa excused himself and lied that he was sick. He didn't want to know what was in the food. S's mother tried to coax him to eat, saying that he'll regain his energy. This is when Grandpa takes the opportunity to find out the truth. You see, in the folklore, to identify whether or not a person is an Aswang is quite simple. Observe their eyes. If your reflection is upside down, then they are an Aswang. Grandpa stared at S's mom's eyes and reeled back in horror. His reflection was upside down. This is when the mom's expression completely changes. She went from concerned to angry and was glaring hard at Grandpa, an expression that basically says, according to him, you shouldn't have done that. That night, Grandpa doesn't waste time and immediately packs up and heads home, lying that there's been a family emergency in order for him to go. He finally returns home and spent a lot of time inside his house in complete fear. The following month, he breaks up with S. She looked at him in sadness and said that she understands, that it was a wise choice for him, but it was quite a shame. Grandpa ended the story. He says that it was a huge shame indeed because he really wanted to marry S. They then make an edit. So I asked Grandpa for more info and details about the story. He said that he has trouble remembering a couple of things, but from what he could recall. After the first night, he asked S where she went because he woke up and couldn't find her. S said that she was in the bathroom due to an irritable stomach. Then he asked her about the weird noises last night and if she heard them. He said that she was silent for a moment before casually responding that sometimes a group of cats would climb up their roof. What a weird excuse. And that's the end of that story. For anyone who's never heard of an Aswang or never looked into what exactly that is, it's an umbrella term for things like vampires, werewolves, witches, ghouls. Another thing called the viscera sucker, which I feel like is probably a pretty self-explanatory thing. The history of the Aswang, they've been around for quite a while. I guess as far back at least as late as the 16th century when the Spanish went to the Philippines and recorded them for the first time. They noted that out of all of the monsters of Filipino folklore, the Aswangs were the most feared. Aswangs have been featured in many television shows, films, books, literature, that kind of thing. I suppose an Aswang is kind of like, like a vampire or werewolf for cultures, Western cultures like America or Europe or whatever. So just as like a little interesting secondary story, after World War II, in 1946, the U.S. granted the Philippines independence from the U.S., but the CIA was not happy with the government that they wanted to install. I mean, it's kind of a long story, but I guess to summarize it, after the United States granted the Philippines independence in 1946, they had some problems with the way the Filipinos were governing themselves, and so the CIA, they wanted to put a stop to that. They wanted to kind of skew the politics of the region into their favor, so they used the legend of the Aswang to kind of scare any rebels into surrendering. And it worked so well that they gave up. They were afraid of the Aswang, and so they gave up, and the CIA got what they wanted. But that's an interesting story. It might be worth a video in and of itself. There's lots of good articles out there. But me personally, I don't believe in the Aswang. I don't think there's any real merit to like vampires or werewolves or witches or anything like that. I know there's been a little bit of a resurgence in witchcraft and all that recently, but I think that has more to do with the aesthetic rather than, you know, any real dark dealings. But that is today's video. Thank you for watching. Have a good one.